5 years after the collapse of the Kathon Dominion, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Galactic Congress convened on the neutral station of Concordia, a massive orbital platform built jointly by a dozen species that had been freed from Chthon rule. Representatives from across known space gathered to discuss the future and the growing concern that had brought them together. The human problem. Ambassador Kenji Yamamoto represented Earth at the Congress. He sat in the human delegation section, listening to the other species debate with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Humanity has honored every agreement," said the Volani delegate. "They helped us rebuild our world and asked for nothing in return. But they have the capacity for such violence," countered the Feltar representative. "We've all seen the reports of what they did to Kathon worlds. Entire planets rendered uninhabitable." "They were at war," the Krell ambassador interjected. "A war they did not start." "That's precisely the point," said Ambassador Velshan from the Trull Confederation. "They were so effective at war that it terrifies us. What happens when humanity decides we are a threat?" Yamamoto listened to the debate continue for hours. Species after species voicing their gratitude for liberation mixed with fear of human military capability. Finally, he requested permission to speak. The chamber fell silent as he stood. "I understand your concerns," Yamamoto began. "Humanity demonstrated a capacity for warfare that shocked the galaxy. We used weapons that horrified even ourselves. We fought with a brutality that seems excessive in hindsight." He paused and looked around the chamber. "But consider why we fought that way," he continued. "The Kathon came to our worlds to hunt us. They saw us as prey, as livestock, as sport. They would have enslaved or exterminated every human in the galaxy. We fought the way we did because we had no choice. We fought to survive, and now that you've survived?" Velshan asked, "What prevents you from becoming the new Dominion?" Yamamoto smiled sadly. "Our history prevents us. We've spent thousands of years fighting each other in wars that grew more terrible with each generation. We invented weapons that could sterilize our own planet. We created ideologies that justified genocide. And we barely survived it." He activated a holographic display showing Earth's history. Images of human wars from ancient battles to nuclear devastation. "This is what we did to ourselves," he said quietly. "Before we ever left our planet, we had learned what happens when violence becomes normalized. We created international laws and conventions specifically to prevent our own extinction. The rules of war we violated against the Kathon. We wrote those rules. We violated our own principles because the alternative was annihilation." The chamber was silent. "We don't want to be the Dominion," Yamamoto concluded. "We've seen where that path leads. We just want to make sure no one ever tries to hunt us again." The session adjourned for private deliberations. Unknown to most of the delegates, a small group of military representatives from 7 species had gathered in a secure chamber to discuss a different approach. "The Congress is too afraid to act," said General Kreshvin of the Trull military. "But we cannot allow humanity to maintain such military superiority. What do you propose?" asked the Feltar Admiral. "A coordinated strike," Kreshvin explained. "We combine our fleets and hit Earth before they can respond. Decapitate their leadership and force the colonies to negotiate." The other representative shifted uncomfortably. "You're proposing we attack the species that destroyed the Kathon Dominion?" The Krell commander said skeptically. "They're spread thin across former Dominion space," Kreshvin argued. "And they've demobilized much of their war fleet. We have a window of opportunity." Before the discussion could continue, the chamber door opened. A human in a nondescript suit walked in flanked by 2 armed guards. The military representatives reached for their weapons, but froze when they saw the human was unarmed. "Gentlemen," the human said pleasantly, "my name is Director Sarah Park from Earth Intelligence Services. I thought we should have a conversation before you do something regrettable. How did you get in here? Kreshvan demanded. The same way we've been monitoring your secret communications for the past 3 weeks, Park replied. Did you really think you could plan military action against Earth without us noticing? She pulled up a holographic display showing transcripts of their conversations. We know about your fleet movements. We know about your proposed strike plan. We know everything, Park said calmly. And I'm here to explain why your plan would be the last mistake your species ever makes. She changed the display to show Earth's current military deployments. You think we've demobilized, she said. That's partially true. We've reduced our active fleet by 60%. But those ships weren't decommissioned. They were mothballed. We can reactivate the entire war fleet in 72 hours. Additionally, we've spent the last 5 years upgrading our weapons and defenses. The display showed new orbital platforms, improved shield technology, and weapons the assembled officers did not recognize. But here's the important part, Park continued. We've also developed automated response systems. If Earth is attacked, a network of AI-controlled weapons platforms will launch retaliatory strikes against every world in the aggressor's territory. It doesn't matter if you destroy Earth, our revenge will be automatic and total. The military representatives sat in stunned silence. Mutually assured destruction, the Feltar Admiral whispered. You've weaponized deterrence. We learned it from our own history, Park said. It kept us from destroying ourselves with nuclear weapons for over a century. Now it will keep the galaxy from destroying us. She closed the display and looked at each representative. Go back to your governments and tell them the truth, she said. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy, but we will not allow anyone to threaten our survival. If you attack us, we'll burn your worlds to ash, just like we did to the Kathon. The choice is yours, coexistence or extinction. Park left the chamber, and the military representatives sat in silence, processing what they had learned. We need to speak with someone who fought them, Kreshvan said finally. Someone who knows if she's bluffing. 2 days later, a delegation traveled to Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, where the maximum security facility held the Kathon war criminals. Threshkon had aged in captivity. His scales had dulled, and his eyes held the haunted look of someone who had seen too much. He received the delegates in his cell under heavy guard. You want to know if you can defeat humanity, Threshkon said before they could speak. The answer is no. How can you be certain? Kreshvan demanded. Threshkon laughed bitterly. Because I've seen what they're capable of. You think you can win through superior numbers or technology. The humans don't care about numbers. They'll sacrifice 100 worlds to destroy one of yours. They'll engineer plagues that target your genetics specifically. They'll turn your own children against you with their culture. He stood and approached the barrier separating him from the delegates. But that's not even the worst part, he continued. The worst part is that they'll do it all while believing they're the good ones. They'll put you on trial. They'll give you lawyers and due process right up until the moment they execute you. They'll follow their laws and conventions right up until those laws become inconvenient. Surely there must be a way, the Feltar Admiral said. There is, Threshkon replied. Don't fight them. The Detheran Dominion controlled 17 species for 1,000 years. Humanity destroyed us in less than a year. You cannot win because humans don't fight to win battles. They fight to erase threats. And they will never stop until the threat is completely eliminated. The delegates left the facility in silence. The attempted coalition never formed. Back on Earth, Admiral Chun, now retired, sat in her garden watching the sunset. Her successor, Admiral Thompson, had invited her to consult on the new defense initiatives. Do you think we scared them enough? Thompson asked. Chun considered the question. Fear is useful, but it's not sustainable. Eventually, someone will test us again. So what do? We do what we've always done, Chun replied. We survive. We adapt. We make sure no one ever sees us as prey again. She looked up at the stars. Humanity didn't climb to the top of Earth's food chain by being the strongest or fastest, she said. We got there by being the most persistent, the most creative, and when necessary, the most ruthless. We're survivors, and survivors do whatever it takes. Thompson nodded, understanding the weight of that legacy. Meanwhile, on the space station Concordia, the Galactic Congress was reaching a consensus. Humanity would be recognized as a sovereign power with all rights and protections. Their military capabilities would be respected but monitored. Trade agreements and cultural exchanges would be encouraged. But most importantly, humanity would be left alone. The galaxy had learned a painful lesson. Some species are prey, and some species are predators. But humanity was something different. They were survivors. And the most dangerous thing in the universe is a survivor who has learned to hunt. Years later, a new species made contact with the galactic community. They were aggressive expansionists convinced of their own superiority. The Galactic Congress held an emergency session to discuss the threat. The newest species representative stood before the assembly and declared, "We are the greatest warriors." The Chthon Dominion committed their full war fleet to the human question 3 months after the disaster at Earth. Supreme Overlord Kreshtar addressed the Dominion Council from his throne on the conquered world of Tharnos. His ancient scales bore the scars of 100 campaigns, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "The humans must be crushed completely," he declared. "They have embarrassed the Dominion and shown weakness to our subjects. We will deploy 5,000 ships and end this infestation once and for all." The council bowed in agreement. None dared question the Supreme Overlord's judgment, even though privately many wondered if the humans were worth this level of attention. What the Dominion did not know was that humanity had spent those 3 months preparing something terrible. In a secret facility buried deep beneath the Canadian Rockies, a team of scientists worked on projects that made even the military observers uncomfortable. Dr. Sarah Reeves stood before a containment chamber, watching nanobots the size of bacteria consume a steel plate in seconds. The tiny machines were programmed to recognize Chthon biological signatures and replicate using any available matter, including the target's own body. "This violates every treaty we've ever signed," said Colonel Marcus Webb, who had been assigned to oversee the project. "The Chthon aren't signatories to the Geneva Convention," Reeves replied coldly. "And they started this war by trying to hunt us like animals. I'm giving us the tools to make sure that never happens again." Webb wanted to argue, but he had read the casualty reports from New Adelaide and Earth. He had seen what the Chthon did to species they conquered. Sometimes survival required becoming a monster. How effective will it be? He asked instead. One Nambot in their environmental system, and their entire ship becomes a death trap within hours, Reeves said. They'll either die from the Nambots consuming them or from being exposed to vacuum when the machines eat through the hull. Meanwhile, in orbit above Earth's moon, human special forces were training for a different kind of warfare. Captain Rodriguez briefed her team in the cargo bay of their stealth ship. The 12 soldiers gathered around her were volunteers, all knowing this was likely a one-way mission. "Our target is the Chthon Dreadnought Fist of Dominion," Rodriguez explained. "We board during their shift change when shields are briefly lowered for supply transfers. Once aboard, we plant these." She held up a small device no larger than a human fist. "Psychological warfare package," she continued. "Audio recordings in Chthon language, visual projections, environmental controls. We're not trying to capture the ship, we're trying to break their minds." One of the soldiers raised a hand. "What exactly are we showing them, ma'am?" Rodriguez's expression was grim. "We're showing them what happens when prey becomes predator. We're going to make them afraid of the dark." The Chthon war fleet arrived in human territory with confidence restored by their overwhelming numbers. They began systematic bombardment of outer colony worlds. expecting the humans to either defend each planet or retreat deeper into their territory. Instead, the humans did neither. The first Catharn occupation force landed on the mining world of Tau Ceti IV to find it abandoned. The colonists had evacuated weeks before leaving behind empty cities and silent facilities. Then the soldiers started dying. It began with skin rashes and respiratory problems. The medical officers could not identify the cause until it was too late. The humans had seeded the atmosphere with a biological agent tailored specifically to Catharn physiology. Within 3 days, the entire occupation force was dead, their bodies covered in lesions that wept infectious fluid. Biological warfare. Threshkon reported to Supreme Overlord Kreshtar with disgust. "They've weaponized disease against us. Counter it with decontamination protocols," Kreshtar ordered. "We faced biological weapons before, but the Catharn had never faced human biological weapons. The pathogens mutated faster than Dominion medical science could adapt. Each new world brought new variants, some attacking the respiratory system, others targeting the nervous system or reproductive organs. The humans had apparently spent their 3 months of preparation, studying every aspect of Catharn biology, looking for vulnerabilities. Worse still, the human special forces began their boarding operations. Captain Rodriguez and her team successfully infiltrated the Fist of Dominion during a routine supply transfer. They moved through the ship's maintenance tunnels, planting their psychological warfare devices in strategic locations. The first Catharn warrior to encounter the effects was a guard named South, who was doing routine patrol in the lower decks. He heard sounds in the darkness ahead of him, scraping metal, heavy breathing, something moving just beyond the range of his vision. "Identify yourself," South commanded, raising his weapon. The lights went out. In the darkness, South heard voices whispering in his native language. "We were prey," the voices said. "We were hunted by things with teeth and claws. We were stalked by predators that saw us as food, so we killed them all. We hunted the hunters until nothing was left that could threaten us." The lights flickered back on, and South saw projections on the walls. Images of Earth's prehistoric predators. Massive reptiles with jaws like steel traps. Cats with fangs as long as a Catharn claw. Bears that weighed more than 3 warriors. "We killed them all," the voices continued. "And when we ran out of predators to kill, we turned on each other. We became so good at killing that we invented new ways to do it. Poisons, gases, weapons that could destroy entire cities." The projection changed, showing human wars. Trenches filled with bodies, cities reduced to radioactive ash, chemical weapons melting flesh from bone. "And now you've tried to hunt us," the voices said. "Now you'll learn what we learned. Predators die when prey fights back," South ran. He reported the incident to his commanders, who dismissed it as stress-induced hallucinations. But then other warriors began reporting similar experiences. The psychological warfare spread through the ship like a virus, feeding on the Cathar's growing fear. Rodriguez and her team planted their final device in the ship's life support center, then evacuated through an airlock. As their stealth ship pulled away, Rodriguez triggered the devices. Throughout the Fist of Dominion, environmental controls went haywire. Lights flickered on and off, creating strobing darkness that made the corridors feel alive with movement. Temperature controls fluctuated wildly, from freezing cold to sweltering heat. Audio systems broadcast sounds of human laughter and screaming in random patterns. The Catharn warriors began breaking. Some refused to leave their quarters. Others fired their weapons at shadows and projections, killing their own comrades in friendly fire incidents. The ship's captain tried to maintain order, but even he had started seeing things in the darkness. When the human fleet arrived 3 days later, they found the Fist of Dominion drifting dead in space. Half the crew had killed each other in paranoid firefights. The other half had died when someone in their madness vented the life support system. Rodriguez's mission had killed a dreadnought without firing a shot. Similar operations repeated across the war zone. Human special forces teams boarded Chthon vessels and military bases, not to destroy them, but to spread terror. They left messages carved into walls written in Chthon blood. "We were prey once. We killed all our predators." The messages were always the same, always written where Chthon would find them. On the bridge of destroyed ships, in the command centers of overrun bases, carved into the flesh of captured warriors, who were then released to spread the story. Threshkarn found one such message on his own flagship. A human team had infiltrated the ship, planted the message in his personal quarters, and escaped without being detected. The message was simple: a list of Earth's extinct predators. Saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, cave bears, terrorbirds. Next to each name was the word extinct, and at the bottom of the list was a new entry: Chthon, pending. For the first time in his life, Threshkarn felt truly afraid. The humans were not just fighting to win, they were fighting to erase. They had studied Chthon biology to create perfect weapons. They had studied Chthon psychology to create perfect terror. They were approaching war with the same methodical efficiency that had let them dominate their own planet. Supreme Overlord Kreshtar received Threshkarn's report with growing alarm. The war was turning into a nightmare of biological weapons, psychological operations, and human tactics that violated every civilized convention of warfare. He authorized a diplomatic channel to Earth. "We request ceasefire," the message began, "to discuss terms of peace and mutual coexistence." Admiral Chun received the message in the war room beneath Geneva. The coalition leadership had gathered to hear the Chthon response. Chun read the message aloud, then looked at her fellow commanders. "Draft our response," she said quietly. The message humanity sent back was brief. "You declared us prey. You came to our homes to hunt us, to enslave us, to make sport of our deaths. We will accept your surrender when your species is extinct or enslaved. Choose quickly, because we are coming for your homeworld." The Chthon Dominion learned that day what total war meant. It meant no mercy, no quarter, no negotiation. It meant humanity would not stop until the threat was completely eliminated. They had awakened something ancient in the human psyche, the survival instinct of a species that had clawed its way to dominance through countless. The United Earth Coalition mobilized with a speed that surprised even its own military commanders. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the war room beneath Geneva watching data streams flow across holographic displays, showing the frantic activity happening across human space. Every shipyard was working triple shifts. Every factory had been converted to military production. Every able-bodied person was either enlisting or working to support the war effort. "How long until the Chthon respond?" asked General Okonkwo from the Army Command. "Intelligence estimates 2 to 3 weeks, Chun replied. "They'll want to mass their forces before striking at Earth directly. Then we have 2 weeks to prepare for the largest invasion in human history," Okonkwo said grimly. But Chun was already smiling, a cold predator's smile that would have alarmed the Chthon if they could have seen it. The captured Chthon scout ships from the Silent Void operation had provided humanity with an unexpected gift. Their technology was advanced, but not incomprehensible. Within days, human engineers were tearing apart plasma drives and shield generators, learning their secrets. "They've been using the same basic designs for centuries," reported Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the reverse engineering team. "No innovation, no adaptation. They've conquered so many species without real resistance that they've become complacent. Can we match their technology?" Chun asked. "Match it?" "No," Tanaka said with a fierce grin. "But we can do something better. We can surprise them." The Chthon invasion fleet arrived at Earth 3 weeks later with overwhelming force. 200 warships, including 5 massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets. Threshkarn commanded the fleet, personally determined to erase the stain of New Adelaide from the Dominion's honor. "Scan for defensive platforms," he ordered, as they transitioned into Earth's solar system. What the sensors showed made him pause. Earth was surrounded by thousands of objects in orbit, but they were not the military satellites he expected. Many appeared to be simple metal spheres. Others looked like converted civilian vessels. There was no organized defensive fleet, no battle stations. Just scattered objects floating in seemingly random patterns. "They're not even trying to defend themselves," his tactical officer said with confusion. Threshkarn felt his unease returning. After New Adelaide, he knew humans did not give up without a fight. "Advance cautiously," he ordered. "Scan everything." The fleet moved forward, and that was when the metal spheres activated. They were not satellites or defensive platforms. They were mines. Thousands of nuclear devices left in Earth's orbital space, each one containing enough fission material to vaporize a small ship. But these were not simple mines. They were moving under their own power, adjusting their positions, tracking the Catharn fleet. "Evasive maneuvers," Threshkarn roared. The first wave of nuclear detonations lit up the void like a string of infant stars. Catharn shields absorbed most of the damage, but the sheer number of simultaneous explosions overwhelmed. 3 smaller vessels, turning them into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. Then the railgun platforms opened fire. Hidden among the debris field of Earth's orbital industry were weapons the Catharn had not anticipated. Magnetic accelerators hurling solid metal slugs at relativistic speeds. No energy signature to target, no warning before impact. Just kinetic force moving at a significant fraction of light speed. A dreadnought took a railgun slug directly through its command section. The projectile was only the size of a human fist, but that velocity it punched through shields and armor like they were not there. The dreadnought began tumbling out of control, venting atmosphere and bodies. "Return fire," Threshkarn commanded. "Clear a path to the planet." The Catharn fleet began unleashing plasma cannons and particle beams, destroying the human weapons platforms, but for every one they destroyed, 2 more seemed to appear. The converted civilian vessels that Threshkarn had dismissed suddenly revealed themselves as kamikaze drones. They came in swarms, hundreds of small craft piloted by artificial intelligences with one single directive: impact and detonate. Each drone contained a fusion warhead and enough fuel to make one attack run. They were cheap to produce, easy to deploy, and absolutely terrifying in their single-minded determination. A Catharn cruiser tried to shoot down the approaching drones, but there were simply too many. They crashed into the hull one after another, each explosion weakening the shields, until finally the barrier collapsed and the remaining drones struck home. The cruiser broke apart in a series of secondary explosions. "This is madness," the tactical officer hissed. "They're sacrificing their ships without crews." But Threshkarn understood what the humans were doing. They had removed the most valuable component from the combat equation: the pilot. Without living beings to protect, the ships could be built for one purpose only: to kill. The battle raged for hours as the Catharn fleet fought its way through the orbital defenses. They lost ships with every kilometer they advanced, but slowly they pushed forward through sheer numerical superiority. Then the human fleet arrived. They did not emerge from behind the moon or Jupiter as Threshkarn expected. They came from Earth itself. Hundreds of ships launching from the surface hung pillars of fusion fire. The ships were smaller than Catharn vessels, and obviously newer, their hulls still bearing construction marks. Admiral Chun commanded the defense fleet from the carrier Roosevelt. She watched the Catharn formation on her tactical display and smiled. "All ships," she broadcast. "You know the doctrine. There is no such thing as a fair fight. Kill them any way you can." The human fleet did not engage in the orderly formation combat the Catharn expected. They swarmed like angry insects, using tactics that would have been called dishonorable by every other species in the Dominion. Human ships would broadcast false surrender signals, then detonate their reactors when Catharn vessels approached to accept the capitulation. Others would ram damaged Catharn ships, using their momentum to drive both vessels into the blast radius of waiting nuclear mines. Damaged human ships did not retreat. They charged forward, looking for enemies to take with them into death. Threshkarn watched in horror as a human destroyer that had lost its main weapons locked its remaining thrusters to maximum burn and slammed into the dreadnought Eternal Conquest at ramming speed. The impact drove both ships into Earth's atmosphere, where they burned up in a spectacular display of destruction. "Demand honorable combat," Threshkarn ordered. "This is barbaric." The response came from Admiral Chun herself on an open channel. "You wanted to hunt us?" Her voice was cold and hard. "Welcome to how humans hunt. We don't fight for honor or glory. We fight to win. And if we cannot win, we fight to make sure you lose just as badly." A Catharn battleship tried to target the Roosevelt, but found itself swarmed by dozens of human fighters. They were too small for the main guns to track effectively, and they carried weapons designed for one purpose: ship killing. Magnetic mines that clamped onto hulls before detonating armor-piercing missiles that buried themselves deep before exploding. The battleship's shields failed under the assault, and the fighters pressed their advantage. One pilot Chen recognized from the roster, Lieutenant James Park, flew his damaged fighter directly into the battleship's engine intake. His fighter's reactor went critical inside the engine core, and the entire aft section of the battleship exploded. Threshkarn realized with growing dread that the humans were winning, not through superior technology or numbers, but through sheer willingness to accept casualties that would break any other species. They traded ships at ratios that should have been devastating losses, but they kept coming, kept fighting, kept killing. "Fall back to Mars," Threshkarn ordered. "Establish a beachhead and regroup." The Catharn fleet retreated in disorder, pursued by human ships that harried them all the way to the Red Planet. They managed to land forces on Mars and establish defensive positions, but the cost had been catastrophic. Of the 200 ships that had entered Earth's system, only 93 remained combat-capable. Threshkarn stood on the surface of Mars looking back at Earth, hanging in the sky like a blue jewel. He had won a foothold in the human system, but it felt like defeat. His communication officer approached with his scales pale with fear. "War Alpha, we've intercepted a human military transmission," he said quietly. "I think you should hear it." The recording played, and Threshkarn heard Admiral Chun speaking to her subordinates. "Today we've shown the Catharn what happens when you try to hunt humans," she said. "They came to our home expecting easy prey, and we've bloodied them badly. But this is just the beginning. We're going to take this fight to their territory, and we're going to show them what real predators look like." Threshkarn felt his certainty crumble. The Catharn Dominion had started a war, but they had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. They had awakened humanity's capacity for total war, and there would be no peace until one species or the other was extinct. The Catharn warship Bloodfang descended through the clouds of New Adelaide like a predator stalking wounded prey. War Alpha Threshkarn stood on the command deck with his claws flexed in anticipation, his scales rippling with excitement. He had hunted 17 species across the galaxy, and each one had proven to be nothing more than sport or livestock. The reports from the scout drones showed this new species called humans were soft-skinned bipeds with no natural armor. No claws, no venom, nothing that marked them as predators. "Class 4 prey," his tactical officer hissed with satisfaction. "They will break easily." Threshkarn studied the settlement below through the viewing screen. A mining colony of perhaps 4,000 individuals. Simple structures made of metal and concrete. Vehicles that moved on wheels instead of hovering. Primitive by any standard of the Dominion. He could see the humans moving about their daily tasks, completely unaware that death approached from above. "Begin the descent," Threshcon commanded. "I want live specimens and I want them terrified." The Bloodfang settled onto the outskirts of the colony with a thunderous impact that shook the ground for kilometers. The rear hatches opened, and 200 Cathon warriors poured out in perfect formation, each one standing 3 meters tall with scales that could deflect most primitive weapons. They carried plasma rifles and shock weapons designed to incapacitate rather than kill. The first humans they encountered were workers at the mining pit. They scattered immediately, and Threshcon allowed himself a satisfied growl. This was how prey always reacted to the Dominion. The warriors moved forward with practiced efficiency surrounding the main settlement. Then something unexpected happened. The colony alarm started wailing, and instead of panicking chaos, Threshcon saw the humans moving with purpose. They weren't running away randomly but falling back to prepared positions. Within minutes, the settlement had transformed from a peaceful mining town into something that looked almost like a fortress. "Interesting," Threshcon mused. "They have some basic defensive instincts." He ordered the attack to proceed. The Cathon warriors advanced on the main settlement expecting token resistance before the humans surrendered. Instead, they were met with a hail of projectile weapons that sparked off their scales. The weapons were primitive chemical-based firearms, but the humans were using them with alarming accuracy, aiming for joints and weak points in the Cathon armor. The first warrior fell when a human in a yellow mining suit stepped out from behind a building and fired a strange device directly into his face. The weapon turned out to be a mining laser, converted into a close-range weapon, and it burned through the warrior's eye socket before he could react. Threshcon watched from the Bloodfang with growing confusion as more warriors fell. The humans were using their mining equipment as weapons with brutal efficiency. Industrial drills became close combat weapons. Explosive charges meant for breaking rocks were converted into mines and traps. Welding torches became flame weapons. "They're fighting like cornered vermin," his tactical officer reported with disgust, but Threshcon saw something else. These weren't the panicked actions of cornered prey. This was coordinated resistance. The humans were communicating through some network using the settlement's infrastructure to share information about Cathon positions. They set up ambushes and fell back in organized retreats, drawing the warriors into kill zones. One group of warriors pursued humans into a mining tunnel, only to have the entrance collapse behind them. Trapped in the dark, the warriors heard sounds in the tunnels around them. Scraping metal, whispered voices, laughter. When the warriors finally cut their way out 4 hours later, half their number was missing. The survivors reported that the humans had attacked from the darkness, using nothing but mining picks and their bare hands. "Unacceptable," Threshcon snarled. "Deploy the heavy weapons." The battle shifted as the Cathon brought their superior technology to bear. Plasma cannons reduced buildings to slag. Shock grenades disabled entire groups of humans. The outcome was never in doubt with the Cathon's numerical and technological advantage, but the cost kept rising. A human female with gray hair held a position at the colony's medical center for 6 hours, using nothing but a projectile rifle and homemade explosives. She killed 12 warriors before finally being overwhelmed. When they searched her body, they found she had been wounded 3 times already, but had continued fighting. A group of human children, no more than adolescents by their size, lured a Cathon squad into the colony's fusion reactor building and triggered an overload. The explosion killed the children and 20 warriors in a blast of radiation and fire. The humans refused to surrender even when defeat was certain. They fought from every building, every tunnel, every dark corner. When they ran out of ammunition, they used tools. When they ran out of tools, they used their fists and teeth. Threshcon had never seen prey behave this way. By the time the settlement fell silent to Cathon, had suffered 43 casualties from a force the tactical computers had rated as negligible threat. Threshkarn walked through the ruins of the colony, observing the human dead. They had fought to the last. No survivors. No prisoners who surrendered. Just bodies that had to be pried from the throats of his warriors. He found a data terminal still functioning in what appeared to be the colony's administrative center. His technicians accessed the human networks and discovered something that made his scales prickle with unease. New Adelaide was not a military outpost. It was a civilian mining colony. These were not soldiers, but workers, families, ordinary citizens. If this was how human civilians fought, what would their warriors be like? Threshkarn composed his message to the human homeworld called Earth. He followed the traditional Dominion protocol for new species contact. He outlined their options with clarity: submit to the Dominion and accept status as a subject species, or refuse, and be hunted to extinction across every world they inhabited. He transmitted the message and waited for the expected response. Plea for mercy, offers of negotiation, desperate attempts to buy time. That was how it always went with new prey species. The response came 3 days later, but it was not what he expected. There were no words, no diplomatic overtures, no begging. Instead, every Chthon ship within 10 light years of human space simply went silent. Scout ships, mining vessels. Even the heavy cruiser guardian of Dominion law that had been surveying a nearby system. All gone. No distress signals, no debris fields. Just empty space where Chthon ships had been. Threshkarn stood alone in his command chamber, staring at the tactical display showing the blank zones, where his ship should be. For the first time in his long career as War Alpha, he felt something he had only ever seen in prey species. He felt fear. The humans had not pleaded or negotiated. They had not tried to reason or buy time. They had simply reached out into the void and erased every Chthon presence near their territory as easily as wiping dust from a screen. Threshkarn looked at the recordings from New Adelaide again, watching the gray-haired female fight until her body gave out, watching the children choose death over surrender, watching civilians use mining equipment to kill trained warriors. The Dominion had made a terrible mistake. These were not prey. These were something else entirely, and war was coming.